G'day folks, and welcome to this report of the 1942 series of turns from the full campaign of Senso. This has been quite a busy year. You can see this very busy area around Manchukuo in the north, where the Japanese have gradually shifted their forces up against the Russian frontier and have launched quite a powerful invasion, quite a strong invasion of Russia. They have captured Vladivostok down here, and they're moving against Sakhalin up here, and it's not Kamchatka, it's Petropavlovsk. Having captured, they've also captured this hex here. I don't know what that one is. Blagoveshchensk. And having secured that, they're now shifting around to the west with a small sort of contingent out in the east over here. They have, what else have they done? They have shifted Kiangsu such that they are a Japanese dependent. They have started to shift, you can see in the Pacific out here, some of their infantry to defend their sort of most important strategic possessions. It's taken them a long time to do this. Because they were so focused on China throughout 1939, 40, 41, they basically left large parts of their Pacific holdings undefended. And they've only, over the past couple of months, started to use their convoys to shift these infantry out. It does take a long time. The Japanese don't have a lot of convoys, maybe half a dozen. So to shift all the way out to Truk or the Marshall Islands out here, basically from Japan, it's 1, 2, 3 convoys. So yeah, that's happening very slowly. At the same time, over in the east, you can see this American build-up. And this is what has prompted this Japanese response. You can see the Americans building up their infantry in Wake Island, Midway, Johnson Island, Hawaiian Islands. The Americans have been trying to focus on building up the infantry, building up their surface fleets, convoys, CV fleets. The bigger, broader story here is that because the Japanese sort of are on the offensive from 1937, they have the initiative, and they have a lot more flexibility in the cards they can play. The US, the US, Western miners, Britain, Russia, they're all restricted heavily by the war state. And until Total War comes out, which only came out, keep in mind, 12 months ago, they can't play many cards. So they're restricted by a lot of the Russians are playing a lot of border defense cards, which do absolutely nothing. It's pretty much the only card they can play on many turns. I'll show you the card plays in a moment throughout the year, but even now at Total War, the Western forces are still playing limited war cards, whereas the Japanese are meeting all their prerequisites and they can play a lot of their total war cards. Again, I'll show you that in a moment. So the broader story here is, this Japanese offensive into Russia, capturing those 2 strategic hexes, about to capture a third. That one might be a bit way off. They certainly have the numbers to capture this pretty quickly. They place a blitz marker here, forcing the Russians to retreat. You can see their forces way up the north there. The problem for the Russians is they don't have two things. Okay, so the Russians can play these big, powerful production cards, which bring in a lot of forces. But if they do so, it pushes the European war display ESV value. You can see it's currently on 2. It'll almost instantly push that up to 5 and an instant Axis total victory. So the Russians can't afford to play these cards because they'll kind of instantly lose the game. So they're forced to play these kind of weaker cards to bring on small numbers of Russian replacements. They are defending in their cities. There's not a lot of maneuver taking place from the Russians. The Communist Chinese are kind of stuck outside Langchao in Kansu, up here. So they can't do anything. They can't mount an offensive. You can see the Japanese now have started to rebuild those Hope forces. Hope is a Japanese dependent. So they're just being built because the Japanese have a lot of replacements coming on. Let me show you the card plays, and I'll kind of run you through in more detail what's been happening. So I brought this out to the board to show you the decision-making processes. So the Japanese started the year by playing Hako Ichu, this card here. They previously played Tojo Expands Power, so they met the prerequisites. They then play some reinforcements. The main thing is this Hako Ichu marker, which goes on the current victory point track, just up there. And this gives the Japanese a lot of replacements each and every turn, I think. Far more than normal. And this is a very powerful card. And so the Japanese, building a lot of replacements. They're going full on, attacking every turn. They're winning this sort of war of attrition against the Russians. And right now, I don't know how the Allies can compete with this. I don't know if there's a card that removes this. I don't know what the downsides of this card are, but certainly the benefits are outstanding. They then followed up. That was their November-December 1941 card. 1942, spring, they played this just to bring on some more replacements, 6 steps, some more forces in the force pool, another valuable card. They then played Imperial Conference. What did this do? Oh, so for some more convoys and some fortresses. So the fortresses were placed in the... Where did I place them? Oops. I can't remember where I placed those fortresses. Oh, yes, down sort of southwest. So there's one here and there was one in the Philippines. Again, just guarding those valuable strategic objectives. And then finally they played Victory Disease for the Blitz marker, which I mentioned, which forced the Russians to retreat from the city. They get an Air Force marker, which is going to be very valuable. 3 infantry steps, and they rolled Chinese Incident here, which didn't do a great deal. So the Japanese, full-on offensive, focusing on their offensive capabilities against Russia, whilst also kind of sending out a few forces into the Pacific to defend against the Americans. Now the tide, I kind of want to say the tide is slowly turning in the Pacific with this American build-up. But it's probably slower than you might expect for 1942. We're at the end of 1942 and the Americans have not commenced any offensive in the Pacific. They played Riviera Conference, which is an important prerequisite for a lot of other events. You can see Pacific Mobilization down here, for example, plus others. It gives them some colonial British forces, which are not going to be of any value whatsoever. A British infantry step. Britain has a neutrality pact until, 3 turns before the end of the game. So that's, I'm playing this mainly for the event prerequisite rather than the British reinforcements. Basically, the story of this game is Japan has signed a neutrality pact with Britain. Britain and their allies are out of the war until, you can see the turn marker here. This is when Britain enters the war. This is when the campaign ends. So not much is going to happen there. I suspect... Japan will probably secure victory before that happens. They then played Doolittle Raid. Again, this is another important event prerequisite. So what the Western powers are doing is basically playing all these events to get them out of the way to meet other event requirements. They then played Victory Program. This is more important. Adds a lot of US forces. The US Victory Program marker, which adds a lot of die roll modifiers, delay modifiers, and so forth, which really helps... I think it kind of helps the Allies. And some more infantry steps. Then we played Pacific Mobilization. It has a CV fleet, the important 231 headquarters, and some more replacements. So this has been all about the Western powers setting up for 1943. And I think they're just about set up. 1943 should see the start of an American offensive in the Pacific. the Russians have been totally hamstrung. They can play 1 war progress card per year. They're up to war progress 2. This is all because of the delay in that European war marker coming out. So the European war didn't start until August 1940, which prevented the Russians from playing a lot of their cards. So they're behind schedule. As the Japanese are kind of ahead of schedule, there's a huge imbalance up there in Russia. They've had to play border defense twice throughout the year. They did play limited war production, which brought on some forces, and they do have some Siberian reserves coming on in the next turn. But the Russians are a bit depressed, as you can see up in the north. They're really struggling. They're vastly outnumbered. The Japanese are, just running rings around the Russians. The Russians are kind of consolidating in these cities, which gives them sort of 6 or 7 steps. And even then, the Japanese are being able to outnumber them 2 or 3 to 1 and grind them down. When they can place those blitz markers, they force those retreats out of the cities. I haven't done the victory point check yet for the start of the next turn, but it will push the Japanese to 3 victory point. I think that's allowed. I have to check the rules on Hako Ichio. So yeah, they should be up to about plus 10 strategic value. And only 5 more needed. So let's look at where they can grab that 5. Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 red markers out here, 1 over here, which will be captured. I'm almost certain of that. So there's going to be 1, 2, probably 3, 4, certainly I think within the next turn. And depending on how fast the Japanese can drive up here, this is Xinjiang, which is currently a neutral Chinese country. The Japanese can certainly capture most of these red ones. It's a case of whether or not the Americans can snatch a few of these Japanese objectives, which will reduce their strategic value. Okay, so that is, as I said, the end of 1942. I'll report back soon on what happens in 1943. We'll see whether or not the Japanese can snatch an automatic victory.